Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good break and are ready to get back into it. I'm Jim Goodell with Quality Information Partners. I'm the Vice Chair of the IEEE Learning Technology Standards Committee, and I work with the IEEE ICICLE Consortium on Learning Engineering. I'm co-author of The Science of Remote Learning with Aaron Kessler at the MIT Open Learning Initiative. And I have the privilege of introducing the next session. And I'll just say, put on your seatbelts because it's going to be a fast-paced session of 4 Ignite talks on the topic of learning records and data standards. To get started, I have the privilege of introducing Jason Tyszko. Jason is the Vice President at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, where he advances policies and programs that preserve America's competitiveness and enhance the career readiness of youth and adult learners. This includes the Talent Pipeline Management Initiative, the Foundation's signature workforce development strategy, as well as the Job Data Exchange, JDX, T3 Innovation Network, and Talent Finance Initiative. Mr. Tyszko's prior experience focused on coordinating interagency education, workforce, and economic development initiatives. In 2009, he served as a policy advisor to Illinois Governor Pat Quinn's administration. In addition, Tyszko was Deputy Chief of Staff and Senior Policy Advisor to the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. Tyszko received his Master of Arts from the University of Chicago and Bachelor of Arts from DePaul University. He is a certified teacher in the state of Illinois. Turn it over to you, Jason.
All right. Sorry for the delay. We will make up for lost time. I really appreciate the introduction, Jim, and it's a real pleasure to join all of you today to talk about this session. I think Jim was right when he said you should buckle up because we have a lot of presentations coming your way. We're going to move through them in quick order, and we're going to take on this topic of learner records and understanding their intersection with data standards. So I think the previous panel and speakers actually set us up quite nicely to talk about how we are moving towards this digital transformation in the learning space and how we're going to be producing the next generation of digital records that will be rich in competency and skill data. We have a number of presenters who are going to touch different aspects of this, but what I was hoping to do is just provide a little bit of table setting around this topic, and then each of our presenters are going to take on a piece of this puzzle. So if we wouldn't mind advancing to the next slide. I want to talk a little bit about who we are at the U.S. Chamber and how we relate to this topic through an initiative that the Chamber Foundation runs, which is the T3 Innovation Network. So the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is the world's largest business association. We represent a federation of over 1,500 state and local chambers of commerce, and collectively through our network, over 3 million businesses. The vast majority of our businesses are small to mid-sized companies, which make up the largest job creators in this country. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation is our 501c3 nonprofit affiliate. I actually work for both, but the work I'm talking about today is actually spearheaded by the foundation, the nonprofit side. So it's not the membership side. This is the side that is more field-facing. So the formal chamber is more hill-facing. The foundation actually works with our membership in states and communities across the country with stakeholder groups to really try to elevate the employer leadership role in a wide variety of education and workforce initiatives. Over the past 7+ years, we have been actually organizing employers on the ground to build better talent pipeline systems with a wide variety of education and workforce partners, including trying to develop better pipelines to support the transition of veterans into civilian employment. As we've been building out those networks, we recognized early on that there were a number of data and technology challenges that were creating kind of points of friction in the labor market. It's one thing to get employers organized, but getting their IT systems in place so they can appropriately signal out what are the in-demand jobs, competency, skills, credentials, and the like was important, because employers need to communicate more clearly and do it in a standards-based way. So we spearheaded a whole variety of work around our job data exchange, JDX, to actually implement a data standard for job descriptions and postings. And we are still working on that to this day, trying to create that next generation of labor market information direct from employers themselves. But as part of that effort, we realized only getting the jobs portion right is just a piece of the puzzle. We do need better structured data around in-demand jobs and skills, but we also need better structured data on what people know and are able to do. And we think that the real magic here is trying to get structured data on the job side and structured data on the learner side. And if we had both of those pieces, we can actually remove a great deal of friction in the labor market and better connect a wide variety of learners to opportunities when it comes to jobs. So what we had done is back in 2018, we had launched the T3 Innovation Network. The T stands for talent, the 3 for Web 3.0. And the idea here was to bring together stakeholders from the business community, the education community, government, the military, other nonprofits, and a wide variety of technology vendors that serve them in order to get them to work together on how we can sync our signals and support this digital transformation. So how are we aligning all of our IT systems and supports to be able to communicate effectively with one another? And how are we making sure it's being done in a very open, distributed, decentralized way? Knowing there isn't going to be kind of one system to rule them all, but through data standards that are helping fuel use case driven solutions to the problems those stakeholders identify, and to do it in a vendor neutral way, we think we could really unlock interoperability throughout the labor market. So backing up a little bit, what's T3 all about? It is an open innovation network made up of over 500 public and private organizations that are trying to build the data and technology infrastructure to accomplish 3 big goals. The first is to make all learning count and to render that learning as data that is fully exchangeable across our systems and across domains, military to employment, education to employment, employment to education, so on and so forth. But the data infrastructure that can make all learning count. Number 2, to make competencies and skills the new currency of the labor market. So what learning do we care the most about? The competencies and skills someone has, and how do we make sure that we can render competency skills as structured data and make sure it is exchangeable and translatable across domains. So we can semantically speak different languages, but through technology and structured data, we can support the translation services to know this work task is equivalent to this knowledge statement. Work task in a job description is equivalent to a knowledge statement in a resume, which is equivalent to a learning outcome in an assessment or credential. And then number 3, we need to address the asymmetries in our current data infrastructure and make sure as we are producing new data, learners and workers are empowered with their data. So how are we increasingly moving towards linked individual level data, promoting digital identity and self-sovereignty, and ensuring that learners and workers can access data about them so they can identify and pursue continuing education and employment opportunities. So no small task. It takes a village, which is why we created the T3 Innovation Network, and we're excited to be bringing to a close our 2nd phase of work and starting our 3rd. So as we've been pursuing this innovation network, if we go to the next slide, one of the topics that came up is learning and employment records, formerly referred to as interoperable learning records even before then, and still referred to as comprehensive learner records. In the military, sometimes referred to as universal transcript. Lots of different names for this, but the idea is coming up with a way to document learning regardless of where it occurs and to render it as data and to be able to combine that information with other records of learning so an individual has access to all of them. Currently, we're calling them learning and employment records. And what we realize is with a lot of interest in moving into this space, we have a real opportunity here to create the first ever LER data infrastructure. And we think that's important because this is not a product problem. We have been generating records of learning and making them digital for quite some time. The challenge is to be able to do so in a way that's fully interoperable and exchangeable across IT systems. And we think the technology and the data standards are there to help usher in this transformation, this revolution around learning. So we're excited to be working as a village now, public and private, government, private sector, and others, to try to figure out how to promote this new interoperability and to be able to exchange records across all of our systems to address a wide variety of use cases. So we're starting to leverage all the various work that's been happening under T3 and work that others have been doing, including the military, to try to figure out how to make this infrastructure possible and fully exchange interoperable learning and employment records. And we think the time is now. We are putting all our cards on the table to get this done. And we are trying to mobilize on the chamber side, the business community to get behind this in a big way. So we could be generating records as well as receiving records, including records from the military, so we can actually reduce this friction in the labor market. So what we have done is we've recently launched the LER Resource Hub. LERhub.org is the URL there. And if you were to go there, you can find a short video on what LERs are and why they may be important to you. And you can access a wide variety of open data resources and standards that makes LER pilot testing possible. We are going to continue to iterate on this hub as we do field testing and we build a larger network and learn from that. But we are going to be hosting as many of the open data standards, open data resources like competency and skill data, and providing guidance on digital identity and self-sovereignty and many other things, knowing that this is going to be an open innovation marketplace of learning records that are increasingly standards-based. So we've just launched the LER Resource Hub about a month ago. We had about 8 pilots that were featured as part of that launch that has now grown to 18. With more on the way. There is a group of pilots being coordinated by the White House and the American Workforce Policy Advisory Board that we are syncing with, and it's only going to grow from here. We've appointed an LER community manager, Phil Long, who is now networking among all the various learning record pilots that are out there, and this movement is only going to grow. So we're excited to be doing our part on the chamber side. We're excited to try to build a bigger table and evangelize around why these digital learning records are important and why they need to be interoperable, and also why they need to be infused with competencies and skills that are structured data, that's rich data, that's usable data for the purposes of hiring, upskilling and career development, for education and training, for a wide variety of use cases. So with that, I think we could begin moving into the discussion. Hopefully that did a little bit of table setting, but what we want to do now is as we venture into this new frontier of learning records that are backed and supported by data standards, we want to start taking a look at, well, what are some other folks doing that's in a related space, that's part of this ecosystem of learning records? And we're going to start with a couple presentations that are going to be focusing more on the competencies and skills. Because again, we could generate the records, but if they're not infused with rich structured data on competencies and skills, and we have shared definitions around them, we're not getting optimal use out of them. So we know that's one of the most critical pieces of what makes a learning record usable and interesting, and we have to get that piece right. So we have a couple presentations that are really going to dig into the weeds on the competency and skill side and how they relate to data standards and learner records specifically. And then we're going to move more on the learning side. So how are we capturing the learning experience, rendering that as data, standardizing our approach, and making sure that it's being increasingly moving into a record that is shareable and can empower a learner and worker with information about themselves. So there's a lot more going on than just that, but we thought this would be a great way to introduce you to the topic, as well as to profile 4 leading examples of work that's happening in this ecosystem. And we are happy to entertain any questions you have along the way. So the way we're going to do this is a couple of our presenters are going to follow the Ignite format. So they're going to have kind of paced presentations over a 5-minute period, and a couple presentations will be in a different format where it's going to be the presenter driving it. So we tried to mix it up, give you a little bit of variety. But each presenter is going to have approximately 5 minutes. I'm going to provide a couple minutes response once they're done before we tee up the next speaker. And if we're running on schedule, we will have a few minutes for general Q&A before we have to move on to the next event. I would encourage everybody on the phone to who's watching the webinar to use the chat function and to send to either myself or to everyone in the chat function any questions that come up along the way. I am more than happy to use my commentary time to feature 1 or 2 of your questions and not save them to the end. So feel free to get a discussion going, talk with our presenters, talk with your peers, talk with me, send me your questions, and we will do our best to make them part of the discussion going forward. So that is the lay of the land for today, and here are the panelists. We're going to hear from Kevin Owens, Jeanne Kitchens, Megan Torrance, and Timothy Welch. Hopefully they've all gotten online successfully, and without further ado, I'd like to invite Kevin Owens to join the discussion. So Kevin, if you're there, if you could turn on your webcam as well as your microphone or phone and do a quick test, I would be happy to provide a proper introduction. So are you with us, Kevin?
Yes, I am.
Great. All right, we see you. You're looking good. We hear you loud and clear. And what I'm going to do is provide just a little bit of background on Kevin. So Kevin Owens is an engineering scientist at the Applied Research Laboratories, which is at the University of Texas at Austin, which is a U.S. Navy University-affiliated research center. After retiring from the U.S. Navy, Mr. Owens earned a BS and MS in instructional design, and he has over 19 years experience in DoD learning engineering, science, and technology, as well as operational research. Activities Mr. Owens supports includes, number one, U.S. Army PEO, STRI, and the Synthetic Training Environment Requirements Process. Number two, the Squad Immersive Virtual Trainer and Integrated Visual Augmentation System Engineering Team. Number three, the STE Experiential Learning for Readiness, SAT Applied Research. And lastly, the U.S. Navy Learning Engineering Applied Research. So Kevin has a rich background, and he is going to now walk us through a presentation that's titled Competency-Based Experiential Expertise. So Kevin, if you're ready, I will give the reins to you, and you have 5 minutes, and I will join you after that.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, just waiting for the slide to pop up here. Okay, so good morning, afternoon from Texas. My name is Kevin Owens from the Applied Research Laboratory, and we're going to cover 5 areas. You guys advance the slides. I don't have control. There you go. So the 5 areas are basically formalized education and training roles, as you can see in the graph on the left. And the key thing here is to integrate the role of andragogy as opposed to just pedagogy, which is usually what most training covers in learning. We're also going to cover the teams and roles are the central context of competencies. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. The quantity and quality of experience is what makes competency, and that's really critical. And we'll talk about that here a little more. Competencies are what standardizes expertise, but to do that, you've got to have raw performance data to make those standards valid. And all of these sort of are based on the lessons learned in our past research. So the next slide, please. So experience is basically a habit, and it starts with, next, education, which builds that understanding, which is, the beginning of understanding what it is that you're trying to become expert at. Next. Training, which is then when you're actually building your expertise and your experience. But to do training, you also have to have, next, assessment. And hopefully your assessment is going to be sufficient, go ahead, next, to provide you feedback. The feedback then needs to, go ahead, next, give you reflection. And the reflection, we hope, and this is always the case of a lot of training, is whether or not it enables emotion. And the emotion is what, go ahead and go next, is what enables the habit, the experience. So all these parts need to really exist as a result of the learning experience. And if so, you get expertise over time, the rate of which based on how much experience you collect. Go ahead and go to the next one. So the competency model that we're basing on, go ahead, will center on teams and roles. Teams and roles will include team tasks, which require certain roles. Go ahead, next. Those roles each have individual tasks. Go ahead, next. And those individual tasks then need to have that basic understanding to perform. Go ahead. Go ahead. And the whole point of this model is to create these team dimensions, which is a new area of performance that we're very interested in, as well as creating agile and dynamic teams that can adapt to unusual situations. Go ahead, next. And the next thing is, of course, the basic supporting elements that are involved in modern competency models. Go ahead, next. So the learning mediums that will be prevalent in the future will include full synthetic, which will basically be focused on novice level kind of training. Go ahead, Nat. Semi-synthetic, which you'll now be able to have a little bit of real movement, but you'll still be synthetic. And you'll see this gradual building process. Go ahead, next. The new kid on the block is semi-live, which is experiential reality or mixed reality, where you're now actually in the real environment, but you still have some synthetics and content to build that experience. And then the last being full live, which is where experts love to train and to work because of the rich context. Go ahead, next. And this is sort of following the idea that education and training can both use these synthetics in this sort of gradual process. And it's really key to design the experience around the level of the learner and where they're at. Go ahead. And this sort of follows the way the Marine Corps and the Army currently use a crawl, walk, run approach. The key thing is that these mediums must be novel, dynamic, and realistic, but more critical is that they're designed so they're just above the level of capability of the learner so that they're actually learning something. So with that said, I thank you for your time. Go ahead. And I look forward to interacting with you in the future.
Kevin, thank you for that presentation. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Wonderful. We did have a question come in, though when I noticed it, it may have come in when I was originally doing my portion, but I want to quickly address it, but I will invite you to also take a look at it, Kevin. But there was a question about standards, and if we were working with vendors that are available through USA Learning to establish them. As far as the learning and employment records go, the way we've been engaging with data standards is through the data standards community. So we're working very closely with IMS Global, with PESC, with HR Open Standards Consortium. We're working with W3C and many others, because where we see this is it's about meeting the data standards community where they are and leveraging what they have and building on it rather than trying to compete with them or do something new. So we think the key to unlocking interoperability is through mapping and harmonization of data standards. And we think that will then allow data to transfer between all these systems much more seamlessly. So work with the communities that are already established and have established networks and business models and build on their success. And T3 is working with all of them. We are actually building data standards mapping tools to support that community long term, and we have big plans for them. If there are other vendors we should be engaging along that process and other communities, we invite them to come in. We want to make this network a resource for them and make sure they have full access to those tools. But Kevin, I wanted to invite you in on that question too. Great discussion around competency-based experience and how you're trying to capture the mastery of those competencies and actually learn from the raw data and performance data around them. How much of this is intersecting with the standards community, or where are there opportunities to maybe build a bridge with them going forward?
So we're working with the Jim Goodell, who introduced us. We're working with the IEEE standards, also trying to make a bridge. So one of the big things that we've learned is that while distant learning and a lot of the competency-based efforts that's been going on are really nailing down a lot of the educational model, academic kind of model. What's been left out is the experiential part, the field training, if you will. And that's both the case in the Navy, in my experience, as well as the Army, which is also my recent experience. So we're trying to take the existing competency elements that are being created and expand on them so they include this experiential realm of performance and the data that we've never really collected before. This kind of raw data, we did a lot of it for the Navy, but the Army's just starting to get into that. And so it's going to just blow up, I think, just based on the small work that we've done with the Navy, the competency capability in terms of the management of it, and the you learn so much just from raw data. It's unbelievable. So but we're trying to work with the standards groups and especially with ADL and you know, make it work so that everyone that we all talk to each other and we're all understanding what each other's doing.
I think that's terrific, Kevin, and we certainly want to support your efforts with collaborating with the standards community. You know, something that really stuck with me regarding your presentation is that experience side, the performance aspect of it, and this is something that the business community is now talking a lot about, because as we're trying to kind of signal out around jobs in the abstract and saying here are the in-demand competencies and skills that we need to fill our most critical jobs that will drive our economic competitiveness. You know, one thing we are now pressing our community to do is go deeper. It's not just identifying a semantically rich competency or skill, it's identifying its preferred demonstration. And that has been a missing piece of the data. So we have these conversations about like these flat skills as if there's some universal definition, or they apply in the same, or their application in the same context, or their application is the same in any context. So a skill applied in a healthcare setting is the same in a manufacturing setting, is the same in a IT setting. We know that's just not true. And so I like where you're taking this, because you're digging into the complexity over the performance of it and its experience, which I think makes the skill and competency that much more rich and usable. But would invite you to take a few seconds to comment on that before we need to move on to our next presentation. So.
Well, and its context is king, right? And that's really going to also be the part of it. A medical professional in the military versus a medical professional in civilian world, they're going to have the same skills, but they're going to have different contexts of applying it. And so when we start collecting those competencies in that data, we have to meta tag it so that it shows that. But we'll be able to do that. And the key thing that we're doing, especially with our work in the Army, is once we are able to collect those experiences, we're able to link them back to those actual raw data. So anyone can go back and look at not just your resume, but say, okay, I want to actually see you perform back then when you did that, whatever you did. And so that's going to be a game changer in my opinion, in terms of validating people's ability to do work, or what difference in education or training they need to adapt to a new team or a new occupation or domain or whatnot.
Great. Well, thank you, Kevin. We did receive one more question, but I'm going to table that one just so you can noodle it. It came from Bert Blair, and it's, are there any plans to add an adaptive learning model to the CDE model? In the Q&A, when we get to the end, we'll try to reintroduce that question. Otherwise, I'd encourage you to use the chat feature to provide a response to the meeting organizers who can share that out. Okay, so feel free to take that conversation offline, but we could try to reintroduce it in the plenary later on. But thank you, Kevin. And we'll be bringing you back into the discussion a little bit later. So next up, we have Jeanne Kitchens, I believe. So Jeanne, are you with us?
Yes. Can you see me and hear me?
I can see you and hear you. So we're in good shape. We're 2 for 2 now. That was the only problem child. All right. So thank you for joining us, Jeanne. Jeanne Kitchens serves as the Chief Technology Services Officer for Credential Engine, where she oversees all technological programs, policies, and advancement across all facets of Credential Engine's work. Previously, Jeanne served as the Associate Director for the Southern Illinois University's Center for Workforce Development, where she not only led the technical design and development efforts for the Credential Engine technologies, but also was among the original team responsible for I'm getting a little feedback. For transforming the Credential Transparency Initiative pilot project into the current organization. In her 20 years with SIU, she had led technical and program development teams for numerous workforce development programs for the state of Illinois and for national programs, including the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation's Talent Pipeline Management Initiative. Jeanne has joined us today to deliver a presentation that's titled Open Skill Solutions, Closing the Gap and Improving the Talent Ecosystem. So without further ado, Jeanne, the next 5 minutes are yours.
All right. Thank you, Jason. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today with all of you watching. If we can go to the next slide, skills as data is important to enable meaningful learning and employment records and is essential to the talent ecosystem. Yeah, we can just hang on right there for a moment. The value of skills is difficult to communicate and determine value at scale. And to effectively scale, it is critical to support building blocks that enable aligning what employers, learners, workers, and credentialing providers identify as the skills that they demonstrate, require, teach, or assess. Next slide. If we take a look at our rapidly changing environment, the connection between skills as data is important. New skill requirements have a significant impact on the job market, and we can look to current research and reporting to confirm the critical need for improved systems. Next slide. In the United States alone, recent research by Credential Engine documented over 730,000 unique credentials, ranging from certificates to certifications to all types of degrees and everything in between. An update to this report this year will show a significant increase in the counts due to digital badges. So this quantity of credentials suggests another indicator of the need for transparent information about credentials and the skills they earn is critical. Next slide. Skill gaps cause people to be overlooked for jobs and come as a great cost to employers and workers who need credentialing organizations to improve alignment to their needs in ways that enable clear education and training pathways and better options that get people into jobs faster, considering the skills that they already have. And next slide. Of course, the reason that we're meeting via an online format today is COVID-19. All of us are impacted, and many people plan to get skill training to get back into a job or to advance in the job market. It takes significant effort to find usable information to help identify and take into account skills people already have for advanced standing in training and for jobs. Next slide. All of these environmental factors are stressing our current talent ecosystems and require improvements to online information and efficiencies with understanding and communicating skills that are timely and scalable. The good news is there are open technologies available now and new tools quickly coming along that we can all use and participate with to close the skills, information, and data gap. Next slide. The goal is aligned communications and understanding of skills between employers, including military, learners, workers, and credentialing organizations, with employers having requirements and multiple tools and systems to support human resource decisions. Credentialing organizations often use learning objectives and have different tools and systems for managing program and student information. And then learners and workers communicate with professional online profiles, resumes, print sales of transcripts, digital badges, job and program applications, and more. Next slide. I would like to encourage our viewers to visit Open Skills Solutions in the presentation library. We've pulled together tools and resources that you can use that are standards-based, open, support advancements with machine learning, and support local skill creation and management. Next slide. We'll go over examples and connect you to user apps and practices and improve talent pipeline management, learner and employment records, and alignment of skills between employers, credentialing organizations, learners and workers in the talent ecosystem. Next slide. Open Skills Solutions is presented by Dr. Robbie Robson, CEO of EduWorks, Joshua Westfall, Director of Policy and Programs with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and me. Please join us to close the skills gap. That is it.
Thank you, Jeanne. I really appreciate the presentation. I was wondering, would you be able to spend a little bit more time talking about the intersection of this open skills ecosystem with the data standards community?
Well, yeah, because at that intersection where we want to be able to communicate alignment and understanding, and as the previous presentation talked about, the context of that, the context of it being in a military environment or some other kind of work environment or a learning environment and so forth. And in the middle there, we have data standards because we have to be able to understand, exchange, and discover that information on the web in a consistent and usable way across those domains that currently, as I alluded to in one of the slides, all use very different information management systems.
And Jeanne, can you help us understand, there's if we're moving towards this open skills ecosystem and there's all these partners and efforts, understanding that, you know, we have to, we need a bridge to get where we need to go.
Yeah.
And if that's the future, what do we do with the past? I mean, there's all of this information already out there about skills and competencies that are not part of this ecosystem. Could you just spend 30 seconds or more talking about, you know, how do we move from where we are now to where we need to be in this ecosystem with respect to the competency and skill data that's out there?
Well, as you were suggesting, there's a lot of competency and skill information that's kind of hidden away in file cabinets, so to speak. They're in maybe a professor's laptop or buried in a syllabus, but or there's a lot of information, for example, in PDFs and basically document formats that aren't machine actionable or usable as data to help us, you know, help inform communications across all of these systems. And some of the tools that we talk about in the open skills solutions include tools, for example, a competency framework extraction module that's machine learning enabled that converts PDF documents into competency frameworks. So we want to look at ways of building the bridge to look at where are we now in terms of how competencies and skills are managed and the formats that they're in, but at the same time lay the path to change that. So going forward, that information is out there as data that is interoperable and discoverable on the open web.
Great, thank you, Jeanne. I really appreciate you responding to that. We had another question/comment that came in, so I'd encourage you to take a look at that. We'll have to put that aside for now. We'll try to reintroduce that back into our plenary should we have time. But basically, a question about, you know, the transferability of skills and competencies, particularly dynamic ones that learned in one setting to apply in another, and how this infrastructure is going to enable that kind of comparison. I think that introduces some interesting considerations around semantic interoperability that maybe we can come back to and unpack. So I'd encourage you to noodle that one. Feel free to provide a written response, but we'll see if we can introduce that question again later. But thank you so much, Jeanne. I appreciate you walking us through that presentation.
Thank you, Jason.
Next, I'd like to invite Megan Torrance to join us. Megan, if your technology is working, please activate your camera and microphone. Hello, Megan.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Hear you perfectly. Thank you so much for joining us today. Megan Torrance is CEO and founder of Torrance Learning, which helps organizations connect learning strategy to design, development, data, and ultimately performance. Megan has over 25 years of experience learning design, deployment, and consulting. Megan and the Torrance Learning team are very passionate about sharing what works in learning, so they devote considerable time to teaching and sharing about agile project management for learning experience design and the xAPI. Megan is the author of Agile for Instructional Designers, The Quick Guide to LLAMA, and Making Sense of xAPI. Megan is also an eCornell facilitator in the Women's Executive Leadership Curriculum. Today, Megan is here to talk to us about supporting adoption through xAPI Learning Cohort. And now we are bridging that conversation that I mentioned earlier, where we had a couple of presentations that were getting more into the weeds of the competency and skill data that needs to be captured within learner records. And now we're talking about the learning experience and how that could be further standardized, captured as data, and shared. So Megan, without further ado, the floor is yours for the next 5 minutes.
Fantastic. And we're doing this Ignite format. So these slides are going to move hands-free for everybody, so we can get those rocking and rolling. So thank you very much. You know, as Jason just mentioned, as Jeanne teed up really nicely in the last session, these are, oh, we can start the silly one with the gnome there. This all works when there is an interoperable data model, or sets of interoperable data models, and people use them. And it's where people use them is really what I want to talk about, and talk about how we can build a model for adoption. So in the summer of 2015, I was at ADL, where Craig Wiggins was leading a xAPI boot camp, and he talked about the xAPI refrigerator as a model for how the TLA worked. And a team and I had just been on an xAPI GNOME project in which we, in the ADL design cohorts, created a mobile onboarding app for a GNOME to process through his new hire experience. And we created a Twitter account for it. It had a catchy story. There was an accelerometer inside of a stuffed fish that I threw in the conference room at ADL. And really what we learned was that when we can demystify and make this as geek-free as possible, people are interested and adopt it. So when ADL stopped doing the cohorts, I said, well, somebody's got to keep this movement going and this adoption experience. So we started a small private cohort group in 2015 with about 35 people. It continues to be, as we start into the next one, free, 12 weeks long. It's completely virtual. There are structured weekly web sessions and teams that are building projects in a safe space, right? Those bumpers around the go-kart race. That group of 35 over the next 3 cohorts grew to an average about 100 people each. And at that point, we couldn't coddle and set everything up for them. They had to be on their own. And as the word about this experience grew and we got to 350, suddenly we had a community that could function and coach and learn itself without my team having to handhold every single bit of learning. And there's 3 ways that people learn here, right? One is the hands-on. They're doing actual projects. I'll talk about those in a minute. There are people who are participating in weekly lecture sessions and actively communicating with each other. And then there are people who are watching from the side. We call those the lurkers or the observers, and they learn. And they continue to come back. And our recent cohorts in the last 3 or 4 have been 600 to 650 people each. And we sign up fresh each and every time. So this is a lot of activity. I did research with the Learning Girl Guild last summer on the state of xAPI adoption. And while we've been at this 7 years since the specification was released, what was exciting to me was to see that very tall red bar of people who are 45% of them interested, but not yet there yet. And this team's goal has been to get them there. So what do we do to, right? Somebody's got to make this happen. This is how we support this. We at Torrance Learning provide the host and the support team, as well as a number of structures like Slack and GitHub for collaboration. And we try to make this as unbranded as possible, as free and as open source as the xAPI specification itself. We have weekly web sessions where we have a gathering place for getting together and talking, as well as a guest speaker, an expert guest speaker who comes in and provides some context, and there's a structured curriculum. And each time we run the cohort, we are enhancing the experience at some point, at some way. And I'm super excited because this fall we're actually switching to Kaltura and their new Row platform, and have the ability to capture rich specs and data about the web sessions and the video consuming using xAPI and a watershed LRS. So I'm pretty stoked about that. And they are among a number of vendors who, while this is a vendor neutral, we don't want people kind of being attacked and like a fishbowl of vendors, right? The vendors do help provide free samples and trials to help make this work. Participants provide energy. The projects that get done in cohort are so exciting. And at the same time, we're providing access. We're making it easy for newbies to get involved in something that otherwise sounds technologically crazy. We're highlighting the contributions of women, of people of color, of people who are taking basic solutions to this, and we're celebrating what gets done. And so we have experts who've been involved in the specification since the very, very early days, and brand new people getting together. We run an xAPI party, which is the capstone event at the end of the cohort, and basically feature out all of the projects that have been done. So I'm going to encourage you to go ahead and sign up at xapicohort.com. It is free, and our next session starts September 3rd. With our party on December 11th.
So Megan, you were anticipating where I was going to go with my first question, which is how can these folks get involved? I mean, what's the next step? How can they join the party?
Next step is it's super easy. So www.xapicohort.com. You get in, you get a free access to our Slack community. You'll get GitHub access. You'll get the Kaltura invite. All that gets you started, and then people can come in. Some people come in with a project ready to go. There's already somebody who says, you know, I want to explore what LMSs offer with xAPI. There are continuations of existing projects. There's some great work that's been done with Pebble eBooks over the last several cohorts, or Makey, or Alexa, or Articulate Storyline, right? So lots of projects that are going, and so you can join a project. You can create a project, or you can watch the action, which is also a totally acceptable way to do this.
Yeah, something else that was on my mind is your presentation definitely shows that this is eminently scalable, and it's catching fire. And with a small team, but with the right set of tools, you're able to kind of proliferate this type of project management experience relatively quickly. What are some lessons learned that you have for this group about how this process and the tools you have could be applied to learner records, to standards-based learning records, to make them more usable, more practical, and get people more trained on them? Just what are the lessons learned for how to scale and how it could be applied to this particular ecosystem?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is like the fax machine, right? A fax machine is awesome, but it really doesn't work. It's not useful until everybody else uses a fax machine. Right? And so you have to build that network. So there's a couple things that have made this successful and scalable. One is to allow entry points for all sorts of different people. We've got people who don't know any coding. We have people who only know coding and don't have a use case to work on. And we make that accessible and make it easy for people to self-select in. Once we get to scale, right, they can self-select into any number of 12, 15, sometimes 20 projects at the beginning of the cohort. The other thing is to have enough experts in the room to not so much take over and do it for people, but to provide that structure. So for example, we had a podcast project team last time around. They could learn from what the video-based project teams and the very well-established video profile for xAPI have already done to kind of leverage that work. And because we provide a host for the cohort who really holds space for the conversation, as well as starts to know who's who. And so being able to garden that community and that discussion and say, hey, you know what, somebody's got a problem over here, and I know 2 years ago we solved that over here, or there was somebody who knows about that, let me put you in touch. So that community role that Craig Wiggins used to do, and we've had through a number of our, we're now on our fourth cohort host. It's kind of like the fourth Doctor Who, but just somebody who can make those connections for people.
Great, and then real quick before we move on to our next one, we did have a question pop up, so in 30 seconds or less, have you seen anyone explore AI with xAPI?
Not in the cohorts yet. Cohort is a 12-week experience, which makes it a little bit tricky. There was one that was getting close. They were using Alexa and VoiceFlow and starting to put those things together. But I think an AI and xAPI project would get a lot of traction and interest in the cohort.
Great, sounds like there's some work to be done there. So thank you very much, Megan. I appreciate you joining this panel. And if you wouldn't mind powering down, we'll bring you back into the Q&A after Tim's presentation.
See you in a few.
Tim, is your audio working? All right, I can hear you loud and clear. Thank you for joining us today. Okay, well, we're on our fourth and final. Absolutely. We're on our fourth and final panel. discussion. This will be led by Tim Welch, who is an instructional technologist at the Naval Air Warfare Center Training Systems Division, located in Orlando, Florida. Currently, Tim is working with the Central Florida Tech Bridge, Naval X, as the technology pollinator. He has been involved in new technologies as the instructional technology lead for Ready Relevant Learning, Modern Learning Strategies, the Ready Relevant Learning, Modern Learning Strategies team, which brings mobile technology to the training fleet. And he's also served as principal investigator for the Defense Health Agency and their Total Learning Architecture Requirements effort. He has an MA in Instructional Technology, Instructional Systems, and a BA in Music Education from the University of Central Florida. Today, Tim will be joining us to talk about the Total Learning Architecture for the Defense Health Agency, so TLA for the DHA, in modern medical training. So Tim, without further ado, the floor is yours for the next 5 minutes.
All right, good deal. Well, this is another Ignite presentation. So if you want to go ahead and get started with the slides and we'll let them roll. So Total Learning Architecture for the Defense Health Agency. So as many of you know, Defense Health Agency is a newly stood up agency to support the health, medical health services for all of DoD, so all 5 services. How we got into working with this was we had the opportunity to brief J7, IT specifically Captain Anthony, and convince them to move from a top-down management construct to a learner-centric model, which the TLA was part of that. The big challenges we're looking to solve for DHA is we have lack of complete data across the board. Training content's not optimized or standardized, and it's siloed. So it doesn't have the kind of granularity that we need. So the first pass that we made at this was a very simplified version of what a learning architecture would be. Notice that standards, protocols and standards are right there in the middle, the centerpiece of what we need to work through. But we needed to further illustrate what the real challenge was. And you can see that this is just a geographically widespread agency, and it's got multiple partners. It's got Air Force, Army, Navy. The first thing we want to do is make sure that training is received in clinical and operational environments. So we've got 2 different domains to work with, and we need to capture both the learning and the work experience to put into the system. So this is another little challenge. And then we've got learner profiles that need to be created. We need to be able to tell what can the learner do and what do they need to know, and then we prescribe that training. But then again, that needs to go through the various partnerships, the Air Force and Army. We laid out a roadmap, and this is pretty simple roadmap in terms of it's the basic ADDIE process, but we tend to spend all of our time in number 4, training, deployment, delivery. We love coming up with new ways of giving training, but what we really need to focus on is these core centerpiece standards that we need to measure by, so creating the metrics and threshold performance, so KSAs, competencies, knowledge and skills frameworks, and then also that data strategy to collect those. That's xAPI. What we want to get to is this fundamental move from the top row down to the bottom row of how we actually perform these assessments. And if you look at the top row, right now it's just a checkbox. We just know that you took the course, and that's all we're really at with medical, clinical, operational, and throughout the DoD. We want to move beyond that and get a little more granular. And maybe it froze. Oh, there we go. So we want to get into role-based readiness. We want to know what is the job, what are the job qualifications, what does the job need? And so when you think about clinical and operational, you've got a medic moving from a forward deployed area back into a hospital. The job is technically the same, but it's very different. So that gets us to the future. Where we want to be is have granular systems throughout the architecture that provide some standardized metrics and thresholds that we can start to look at a job and look at training needs systematically. So right now we're working on component level requirements, so a giant functional requirements document. We're looking at provider metrics and assessments, so starting to build off of critical task lists. And then we're looking at, can we transition this to the patient implementation, so patient TLA for the next steps. So what we're moving to next is the big thing that we're going to start doing is building out some of these things and testing these out. So we've got a sandbox environment that we're standing up. In that environment, we're going to be able to do a market research where we actually are standing up these systems and applying them against our requirements in a real functional way. So this is our sandbox. We do plan to interface with the ADL sandbox quite a bit by being able to trade both our content and data, but then also reuse some of their what they're leaning forward on as far as the technologies go. So challenges, operational clinical requirements, both concurrent and interoperable. This is a real big one. These are joint. They all don't like to talk to each other. So making the Army talk with the Navy, funding is a challenge. And then depending on the previous two, where are we going to have the TLA? So one of the big things I didn't emphasize nearly enough is the nature of this topic anyway, is the standards, the data standards, the learner profiles. These things have to be built out in order to make this giant map flow and work together. We need to be able to interoperability between services, between locations, between systems. That's the key thing that standards is going to bring to us and allow us to build that architecture for the future.
Thank you, Tim. Really appreciate the presentation, and definitely helps kind of bring it all together for us to see what the possibilities are. And it seems like you all are making some terrific progress right now within the branches to try to build this total learning architecture. But it seems like in order to unlock true interoperability, you mentioned standards are going to be key, but to be able to exchange these kinds of records and experiences from your community to my community, the business community, for example, what's the work to be done there? Where should we start?
Well, for the medical, it's actually much easier to go from government out into industry, because in the medical case, the industry is driving the vast majority of these standards, especially when you look at the clinical environment. So competencies outlined for medical personnel is quite vast in the industry. Or our challenge is a great example is tourniquet was even something that was very specifically tackled early on when I came working with DHA. We were doing tourniquet 4 different ways, and even within those 4 different ways, there were multiple variants in that. And we weren't having a communication on how you even do the job, let alone when you train somebody in how to do that particular activity, what is the real measure of success? So we're finding that even inside DoD, we're having to standardize, where industry tends to move very fast and rapid to standardization and optimization. We're very slow to that because of the nature of our requirement. Right now, medical is second tier in terms of requirements. It's there to support the larger unit. It's not so much the driver. Whereas when you look at a hospital in the real world, it's all of the medical care is the primary driver of that institution. So they are very focused on that and is much more agile. So it's a interesting flip challenge than the work that I've done with Navy in the past.
Great. And Tim, yeah, well, actually, before I do that, we had a question come up where someone was requesting your contact info. So just to the meeting organizers, not sure if there's a place we could direct folks for contact information, or if there's plans for how to share that out, but just wanted to flag that people are asking for it. So if we can get them the information they seek, that would be terrific. But Tim, one of the things I want to bring up is, you talked about like an industry standard in terms of, here are the competencies and skills you should know and be able to do. But then there's the data standard to actually capture it as an element of data that can be fully exchangeable across systems. You really, in this case, you need both, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the other challenge with that very specifically is there are some data standards in industry that are being pushed, but we need, because we've got the clinical and the operational environments, we need at times that data standard to be a little more granular than what it's actually going towards in the industry, because we need to be able to compare that clinical work environment in the same job title and category in the operational environment. If you spend 6 months in this forward deployed triage center and you come to a high rate urgent care in an urban setting, do you have the same skill set? do you need the same skill set? You know, it just may be simply a blanket triage kind of activity, you know, but we need a little bit more granular detail in that. So it's an interesting challenge, and we're hoping to, through our efforts, to really communicate out to the medical community some of these things, and they seem so far receptive to wanting to meet that need.
Terrific. We may come back to this, Tim, because I think this relates to a question that came up during Jeanne's presentation, but I did want to address for folks that on the iFEST website, there is a speaker gallery and bio section, and we encourage you to find that, and you should be able to find the contact information for all speakers, including Tim. So we encourage you to check out the speaker gallery and bio on the iFEST website. Tim, thank you. Actually, you can keep your camera on if you don't mind, and I'd invite the other panelists to reactivate their cameras and microphones. And we do have just a few minutes before we need to jump into the next session. So I was hoping we can just kind of open up for questions. So I'd encourage the audience to send any questions our way, but maybe just to start things off, Kevin, we'll come back to you. We did have a question come in late that we weren't able to address, but I'd like to reintroduce it. And it was a question of whether or not there are plans to add an adaptive learning model to the competency-based education model. So maybe you could take just a few seconds to address that. And then, of course, anyone else on the panel that has a thought or two on that topic is welcome to jump in as well.
So the research we're actually applying CB2 is a Army project called STEEL-R, Synthetic Training Environment for Experiential Learning and Readiness. And we're working with the GIFT product, which many might know is a ARL, Army ARL, now CCDC, Soldier Center, Orlando, STTC product that is focused on adaptive, intelligent tutoring and adaptive learning. So we are integrating that as part of looking at prototyping and researching the integration of that into that model, because we are going to need AI and automation support to capture the kinds of data, the complex data that's going to happen out in the field, especially with teams. So absolutely.
Thank you, Kevin. Anyone else want to take that one on? If not, I wanted to come back to the other comment that came in, which was looking at, this came in during Jeanne's presentation, but I think it actually has potential applications for you, Tim, as well as you, Megan, and Kevin. I think this is all inclusive, actually. So this idea that, skills and competencies are agile and adaptive, and learned in one setting can be applied in another. But we don't always necessarily speak the same semantic language. So as learning is happening in one setting and being documented as data that is theoretically going to be shareable to other systems, does it fully address the semantic interoperability challenge of saying, if we don't, yes, the data elements are structured the same way, but if written differently, because it's a different community of practice, will we get where we need to be, where we know this apple and this orange are essentially the same thing? Or is this, we're not there yet, the technology is not there yet, but we know that, the military speaks a language. I imagine every branch speaks their own language. The private sector speaks their own language. And Tim, you had mentioned that, healthcare is an easy place to start because there's actually some standards. Well, a lot of our companies and industries we work on, no such thing exists, or you might have competing standards even within the same industry. So yes, we're getting better at structuring data and exchanging it, but how do we address the underlying semantic interoperability around competencies and skills that are really necessary to make learning records work? So I kind of open that up to anyone. Feel free for someone to take the first stab. Just jump in.
Well, Jason, it's, it would really be challenging for every player. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yes.
Okay. For all the players in the ecosystem to literally speak the same language. I mean, if you just look across our own communities throughout the United States, we literally all kind of speak in different kind of languages that have to be interpreted. So, but I do think that there are strides in using algorithms and machine learning to be able to take those skills, and the challenge with them not being static, because they are ever evolving. People are, honing their skills over time. credentialing organizations should be, you know, adapting to the requirements of employers that have to, you know, that need advanced skills or new skills on new tools and technologies enabled and so forth. So I think that another thing that's happening is with open infrastructure, there can be ways to support large quantities of data that can help machine learning address this at scale.
This is Megan. I'll jump in also on this one because Jeanne kind of opens up a really interesting line of thought here around each industry is going to have their own vertical and language. Within the xAPI specification, there's right now emerging the concept and the use of profiles, data profiles that can be both for data sources, video, podcast, e-learning, experiential learning, whatever, but also data topics. Right. And so when I'm in the medical field, and actually there's work on the Medbiquitous profile, right? When I'm in the medical field and I say, you know, I give a particular term, right? It means something as long as I'm referencing that profile. And so that will allow us, as long as we follow those. I think that the big thing is that openness and that interoperability. If something already exists, use it. If it doesn't fully meet your needs, expand on it, but don't go off and make your own. If something doesn't exist, design it knowing that it's more powerful in a community environment than just your own closed black box system that doesn't talk to anything else. And be that first start. So I know a flashcard, a piece of flashcard software, effectively it's much fancier than that, but I was looking at a flashcard data profile. Right? And how do they extend what's there so that their tool is interoperable with other tools?
So
Yeah,
one of the interesting, oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No,
one of the interesting things that happened with DHA, the work there is when we started adaptivity of learning was the hot topic. But what we found as we moved through the requirements that this very core topic that we just spoke of now is the most critical thing in order to make all the rest of that happen. If you don't have some sort of equivalency and be able to translate in an effective manner, you can't build out competencies. You can't build out. A key thing is how many times do you need to do chest compressions on a mannequin versus something in a clinical environment? That's a very complicated measure that you just can't simply put a checkbox next to. You need to really sort of have some equivalency to that. And are you talking about the same thing? Back to the tourniquet conversation. So this is the most critical thing that we're finding. And we're pushing adaptivity way down low because we want that macro adaptivity, being able to just determine, are you 80% of this new job that you're going to be walking into? Do you have, what's your gaps? What do we need to give you day one or prior to day one to make you that much better?
I want to
final
just
thoughts
add
on this?
that, yeah, I just want to add that first, I think we need to start training our future instructional designers so that they are aware of these new terminologies, schema.org, xAPI, things of that nature. And that's going to have to sort of be an enabler. The other thing is to sort of branch off of what Jeanne and Megan was saying was that competencies themselves are going to have the ability to morph to different domains. They call them configurations, profiles, if you will, and they'll allow you to create your own vocabulary or vernacular, but they will translate themselves automatically to other domains. So you won't really have, you can still use your own vernacular, but back in the competency framework, in the competency management system, it will translate for you. So that'll be nice as well. It's just a matter of designing it and design your competencies that way.
Great. Well, I'm going to save the last word for myself, and I want to build off kind of a theme that Kevin was introducing there, which is a bit of an elephant in the room for a topic like this. I think the upshot is the technology and standards are getting there. This total learning architecture is feasible, and it's going to be usable. But the challenge is, are we going to get the incentives right and do the necessary change management to make sure this new infrastructure could actually be scaled and used in a way that really has impact on the ground, meaning people's lives. And this is weedy stuff. And it definitely can be a build it and will they come kind of approach. And I think we, in addition to getting the technology right, getting the standards right, we need to really think about like what Kevin was saying, which is how do we get to the folks who need to know this and be able to use it as a tool to get done the work they need to get done. And like Megan was introducing earlier about, how do you scale this and build a community of practice and a network that can proliferate this? The good news is the standards are getting there, the learning records are going to be possible, but we have a big lift across a lot of different verticals to do the education, the socialization, and to make this stuff practical and usable on the ground to get work done. And I think that's a conversation we're going to have to take up on another day, but it's exciting to see all the work that's been happening out there already, the work that has really been R&D'd inside the military and the contractors they use. I think it's really exciting. So I hope you all enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. And with that, I'm going to hand things back to Jim Goodell. If he could rejoin us, let's all power down our cameras. And I think Jim will close us out and introduce the next session. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
What a great session that was. So much ground was covered having to do with learner records and data standards to support learning and to recognize learning and experiential learning and in team context and competency-based. So much ground was covered. If we were in the physical space of the live conference on site, this would be the time that I would ask you all to give a round of applause to the rock star panelists and moderator for this session. I can't do that, but I could ask you to express your applause in the chat. So please go ahead and do that. And I'll also remind you that once the live sessions are over, there are some great asynchronous sessions. Be sure to block out some time on your calendar to go and take a look at those asynchronous sessions afterwards.